Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We are live. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II. I am the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party, and with me today, I am pleased to have a wide array of representatives from the Transhumanist Party, including officers and ambassadors. So among our officers, we have our Director of Marketing, Arin Vahanian. We have our Director of Social Media, BJ Murphy. We have our Director of Admissions and Public Relations, Dinorah Delfin. And we have Tom Ross, who is our new Director of Media Production. And among our foreign ambassadors, we have Denisa Rensen, our ambassador to Japan. We have Palak Madan, our ambassador to India. And we have Pam Keefe, our ambassador to Hong Kong. So over the course of this meeting, we may have others join. And as we join, I will introduce them. But in the meantime, let us begin because we have 2 hours for the meeting. And we already have some activity in the chat. Dan Elton says, hello, fellow transhumanists. I'm pleased to announce that I've launched the Maryland Transhumanist Party. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Yes, Dr. Dan Elton has launched the Maryland Transhumanist Party, and it has been a pleasure to work with him thus far, so please do check them out. And we also have, I believe Arin might have lost his video feed, but hopefully he will still be able to hear us. We are going to entertain questions on each agenda item as that item arises, and if there are other questions from the audience, we will take those questions at the conclusion of the scheduled agenda items. We are scheduled to go for 2 hours today. We have a full agenda. And the first item that I would like to discuss is our 2019 Transhumanist presidential nomination, primary, and debate process. The US Transhumanist Party strives to be innovative, not just in terms of the policy ideas we put forward, but also the processes of selecting candidates, the processes by which political parties operate. And we strive essentially to provide a proof of concept and a role model for how people should be nominated to the office of president. And I think this election season is going to give us a great opportunity to do that. One of the pieces of infrastructure that we already have in place is electronic ranked preference voting, where no matter where you are in the world, you are able, if you are a member of the Transhumanist Party, to participate on our electronic ballots. And typically we have a voting time window. Historically, it has been 7 days so that people can vote at their convenience, and prior to that 7-day time window on the issues where we've had votes in the past, we've had an exposure period so that people are able to study the issues and even propose options. With the presidential nomination process, clearly we are going to need more than a 15-day or 30-day exposure period. On the other hand, we want to keep it shorter than the conventional political party's primary process, which now pretty much has encompassed approximately a 2-year time frame. And the problem with that lengthy of a time frame is that a lot of voters do unfortunately have short attention spans. And so if there's a relevant piece of information early on, those voters might not take it into consideration when it comes time to make their selection. And furthermore, a large problem in contemporary American politics is the staggered primary season, where in some states, the voting gets held much earlier than in others. And as a result, by the time the primary voting gets to certain states, say California or Texas, but even Nevada, which is a relatively early state, some of the options are no longer available for people to select among. So they begin to enter into this pernicious calculus of trying to vote for the lesser evil. So we are not going to make those same mistakes. We're going to have a relatively short campaign and primary season. By relatively short, I mean several months. And then we're going to have a simultaneous voting period for all US Transhumanist Party members, no matter where they reside. And I think it would be approximately a 7-day voting period just to give people the opportunity to cast their ballots, but nobody is going to know how other people voted until the end of it. So they're not going to be able to say, oh, candidate X can't possibly win, so we'll disregard them. Rather, they will be encouraged to vote their conscience and rank order all of the options on the ballot according to their genuine preferences, because we do believe that generates a superior outcome and a more representative outcome. Now, in terms of candidates, this is the US presidential nomination process, so we do have to consider the constraints of the US Constitution. I do not like the fact that the US Constitution requires one to be at least 35 years old and a natural-born US citizen to run for president. However, in order to have a valid candidacy, those constraints do need to be observed. So we are looking for candidates who are 35 years old or older and natural-born US citizens. If you know anyone, or if you know anyone who might be potentially open for endorsement, please let me know, because our parameters are fairly broad. The only real restriction is that that individual cannot run as a candidate for the Republican, Democratic, Libertarian, or Green political parties, or any other explicitly non-transhumanist political parties. And furthermore, that candidate should agree not to drop out until Election Day. So we don't want a situation where the candidate we endorse drops out and endorses some more established political party candidate, because that would repeat the fiasco that occurred with the Futurist Party in 2015. The Futurist Party endorsed Bernie Sanders via an electronic vote on Reddit. And then we know what happened to the Bernie Sanders campaign. Bernie Sanders ultimately ended up conceding and endorsing Hillary Clinton. So you could say the Futurist Party essentially constituted a very minor stream of support for the Bernie Sanders campaign, which then became a relatively minor stream of support for the Hillary Clinton campaign. So we don't want to end up becoming a small feeder organization into one of the major political parties. So the candidate should be willing to stay in until the end. The candidate should not be running as a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, or any other non-transhumanist party. And the candidate should also be able and willing to support the campaign financially, however much or however little that takes. The reason for that is the US Transhumanist Party is a non-monetary organization. So we do not have any money, we do not accept any money. We can, however, endorse candidates, and in half of the states in the US, it's possible for a candidate to add a political party designation next to his or her name on the ballot, which doesn't have to be the name of a registered political party in that state. So a candidate who is running as an independent officially, but whom we endorse, can put the name Transhumanist Party next to his or her name on the ballot in about half of the jurisdictions in the US. In the other half, that's not possible, but they could still say in their campaign materials they are a candidate endorsed by the US Transhumanist Party. We don't necessarily have to limit ourselves to candidates who specifically call themselves transhumanists, as long as they're not opposed to transhumanism, and as long as their platform and the policies they advocate have substantial similarities with the US Transhumanist Party platform and our values, and as long as they agree to be open to endorsement and agree to have their names included in the ballots. So what I hope to achieve is to have at least several, between 2 and 4 candidates who would be willing to run for president in 2019 and essentially compete with one another in this electronic rank preference primary. Prior to that, we could hold some virtual debates between them. We could have them campaign using a variety of means that they choose to use and try to convince individuals within the transhumanist movement to support them, but also they could reach to other demographics and try to convince them to join the Transhumanist Party so that they could participate in this process. And this, I hope, will also attract more publicity to the Transhumanist Party. It may attract media attention, and it would culminate in a nomination event, kind of analogous to the party's presidential nominating conventions. So the Republicans and the Democrats each have their own conventions in approximately early summer of the election year. We're going to have ours earlier. I am thinking of having it coincide with RadFest 2019 in October in Las Vegas. So if I can convince Jim Stroll, who is the organizer of RadFest, to have a portion of the event, which is essentially the nomination acceptance speech of whichever candidate gets elected in the primary, I think that would be a great venue, and it would be a great opportunity for that person to receive some media exposure. So with that, I will entertain any comments that any of the officers and ambassadors have about this process, or any suggestions. I haven't formally published a set of guidelines or a time frame yet, but I'm hoping that this process could begin sometime in April from a formal campaign standpoint. Prior to that, I will informally entertain suggestions for candidates and perhaps try to network with some individuals who might be interested in running, but you can do the same as well. So any thoughts about how we will approach this endeavor? No thoughts? Dinorah?
Looks very promising, and I wish that that more people will be aware to this way of electing, which is the new way of creating a better democracy. And it has been a great experience for me, actually, to be able to understand this process. And I wish I could just be more involved in spreading the word.
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry. One objection that always comes up is, there's a duopoly. There's no, a third party doesn't have a chance, whatever, what are you doing? But maybe it's about thinking of it as more of a think tank for whoever gets in there. And yeah, another concept that might be worth considering, doing something completely outside the box in maybe coming up with a full cabinet of people to have experts on all the fields and the cabinets that we want to create for transhumanism, and actually put up a group of maybe 6 or 7 people at a time. Maybe not a full cabinet, but the major cabinet positions that you want to be able to vote for a group mind. People who are experts in science, people who are experts in politics, every key cabinet member. It might be kind of newsworthy to be putting 6 people's name on election poster.
Interesting.
Yes, that is interesting. And along these lines, Tom, I'm thinking once we have a presidential nominee, we could consult with that individual and also see if he or she could bring in leading experts within the transhumanist community as hypothetical cabinet members. I say hypothetical cabinet members because I realize the stranglehold that the two major political parties have on the US electoral system is quite formidable. And in all probability, we are not going to have a transhumanist president elected in 2020, with one potential caveat, which I will mention shortly. But if that caveat doesn't hold, then I think once we have a nominee, that person is going to run a primarily educational campaign. And it will be an opportunity for experts within the transhumanist movement to rally around that campaign and essentially put themselves forward for cabinet positions that match their levels of expertise. Say, have a biomedical scientist be the next head of the Food and Drug Administration and liberalize some of the restrictions that currently hamper the development of anti-aging therapies. Along these lines, we would have to solicit expertise in a wide array of fields. We're going to need a transhumanist energy secretary, for instance, or a transhumanist secretary of education. And certainly transhumanism as a comprehensive worldview would have many transformative insights to contribute in those areas. Now, I wanted to bring up a comment that David Wood made. He asked, what about candidates, e.g. Andrew Yang, who are currently hoping for selection by one of the other parties, but who might be interested in switching to endorsement by the Transhumanist Party? He also says the timing would be difficult. They might not drop out of the other party's race until after the Transhumanist Party selection process is already completed. And David Wood is entirely correct that the timing would be an issue here. We actually did reach out to the Andrew Yang campaign, and one of our newer members, Keefe, has been doing great work in terms of outreach, and he was fortunate enough to actually get a response from Andrew Yang directly. And I will say I admire a candidate who personally attends to his own correspondence. I want to obtain the exact response from Andrew Yang because I think it's informative as to what he's thinking. So Andrew Yang says to Keefe, honestly, I have not determined what I would do then. And the question Keefe posed was exactly what David Wood's inquiry was premised on. What happens if Andrew Yang doesn't get the nomination for the Democratic Party? Would he be open to switching to an independent run instead of endorsing one of the other Democratic candidates? But Andrew Yang said, believe that the campaign will make it clear what the next best step is. Do not want to be a spoiler, as I think defeating Trump is job number one. So this is where we run into some issues, because in my view, primarily the Transhumanist Party is not focused on, let's say, a negative campaign or a campaign to defeat somebody, make sure somebody doesn't get elected. I've had some harsh criticisms of Donald Trump's presidency myself, but I don't see it as the role of the Transhumanist Party to be part of the anti-Trump resistance or to engage in politics against something. We are in the mode of a new paradigm of politics. So we're trying to construct a longer-term vision of the future, which means we need to have someone in the race who is going to articulate that vision. If whoever Trump's leading opponent ends up being is going to primarily articulate a more standard Democratic Party message, or primarily anti-Trump message. Look at how horrible Trump's presidency has been. We don't want a second term, etc. That's not going to enable the transhumanist message to be heard. This is why I don't consider it feasible for Andrew Yang to be our nominee in 2020. If he were to drop out of the Democratic primary sometime in the spring of 2019, I would approach him again. And certainly he's a valid option to put on the ballot based on his policy views. I have some differences with them, but that would be up to our members to decide. However, I would not wish to do that as long as he's running as a Democrat, or as long as he says he would lean toward endorsing another Democrat just to prevent Trump from winning. So that's my response to David Wood's inquiry. And let me see if there are any other comments on this subject matter before we move on. Joseph Barney says, that sounds like a good plan. Thank you. Dante Kniegel says, hey, transhumanist from Argentina, I remember hearing some chatter about trying to reach out to Ray Kurzweil. Now, as many of you know, I actually interviewed Ray Kurzweil for 15 minutes at RadFest 2018 in San Diego. That was a great interview. It's now available on video. I'm not sure Ray Kurzweil would want to run for president, though. My thinking is, if he were to be involved, he could be part of the hypothetical cabinet. If he were willing to do that, I think that would be great. But if I were Ray Kurzweil and I had the job as Google's director of artificial intelligence, and I were a world-famous futurist and influencer, I don't think running for president would appeal to me. I just think Ray Kurzweil has a better job right now, to be honest with you. So I will reach out to him later on this year to see if we can have the benefit of his influence and his support for the broader idea of the Transhumanist Party and the presidential nomination process and whomever the nominee ends up being. Then, in terms of other questions, Cyborian, the Unknown Explorer, I think I know who said Unknown Explorer is, states, I like Gennady's logic. Well, thank you very much. And we will address some of the other questions and comments later on in this meeting. But in the meantime, let us proceed to our ambassador segment, because we have 3 of our foreign ambassadors here. And I would like each of you to give an overview of what you've observed in terms of sentiments toward transhumanism and emerging technologies, and the attitudes of the public in the countries where you have had a presence and for which you are the ambassador to the US Transhumanist Party. And Denisa, if you're available, let's start with you and your experiences in Japan.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. So I just spent a few weeks in Japan. At the beginning of February, I ran a salon on age reversal with a group of Tokyoites. And it was very insightful in many ways how the difference between the I cultures that we live in and the we culture that Japan lives in, and how that is going to change the way transhumanism is branded in the we cultures of Asia and the I culture of Western Europe and North America. Japan is obviously just very organically transhumanist. It's not even a philosophy that needs to be talked about. You know, you don't necessarily go to the convenience store to buy your drink. You just get it off the vending machines. Pretty much everything can be bought off of vending machines. Even your bath in your apartment or in your house, you know, tells you what temperature the bath is at and when it's on. Like, it's just, you know, the Japanese culture is beautifully supported by technology already, and there is this gratitude in it. I feel like I have to respond to the technological voice with arigato, thank you. You know, like there's this reverence already for technology, a respect. It's like it's an entity already that deserves its own relationship with me when I'm in Japan, especially. So you'll find that all over the place. I have not come across any transhumanist literature per se just yet, or transhumanists, but that will be the next phase of when I visit. My focus this time was on bringing the dialogue of age reversal, especially into Japanese women's lives at this stage. So that is just an overview of how I have begun to, you know, bring in the ideas of life extension and technology. What I found is the discussion is not as simple as it is in North America. The Japanese people value harmony. They value relationships. So there is this moral dilemma with, well, really, should I mean, they value age reversal in terms of creating beauty and not being a burden to society. But with respect to this inherent yearning to live long so that I can create an impact in the world, that's a little foreign to the general Japanese soul. Although the younger generations are, you know, tackling and bringing Western ideals of personhood and so on. So we're going to see, it's going to be very fascinating to see how Radfest is received in Japan. The concept of life extension, age reversal, super longevity is kind of a little bit, it's a little uncomfortable because, you know, you have to really brand it in terms of how this is going to benefit the we culture, the whole society, the harmony, everyone thriving. So branding in Japan when it comes to transhumanism will have to take into account the we personhood of that country. And of course, one of the greatest investors in technology is Masayoshi Son, right? He's based between Tokyo and San Francisco, and he's investing billions of dollars in AI development for the benefit of humanity and for the happiness of humanity. You know, the Japanese culture will always be branding towards feeling at peace, feeling in harmony, feeling happiness. So it's always going to have that flavor whenever transhumanism will come into play in a big way in Japan.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for that report, Denisa. Very enlightening and very thoughtfully articulated. And there's a lot of promise there. As you mentioned, there is a certain undercurrent of embrace of technology in Japan that has enabled Japan to very rapidly, in historical terms, become one of the world's predominant high-tech societies. And at the same time, the Japanese culture doesn't have the same stumbling blocks that Western cultures have to transhumanist endeavors. However, it may have other stumbling blocks, as you mentioned, arising from this communal culture and perhaps the inapplicability of the kinds of arguments that I, as a very Western-minded individual, would bring to bear. My arguments in terms of why is it desirable to live longer have predominantly focused on the individual and how can this make every individual's life better and every individual's opportunities better. But in terms of a broader social view, there are certainly arguments that can be deployed there. One example would be, well, Japan has a rapidly aging population right now. It's been deploying technology to counter some of the adverse effects of that. But wouldn't it be great if all of these elders not only had robots to take care of them, but could become biologically younger and contribute their wisdom to the continued development of Japanese society. I think that could be a very promising line of argument to deploy for life extension in Japan. But time will tell, I suppose. And Denisa, while we are on your segment, you also attended TransVision 2018 in Madrid, and you got to ask Sophia the robot a question about beauty. So I'd be interested in hearing you talk about that, but also your more general impressions of the TransVision conference.
Yeah, thank you. TransVision was I've been attending the Rad Fest and some conferences in North America, but I felt the need to go and see what my European colleagues are creating, because Europe is, scholarship at a high level, academia. There is a sophistication to European technologies that's kind of. I just want to see what is being discussed in Europe. Who are my colleagues there? Our colleagues there? What are they focusing on? What's their angle? I think it's so important to begin to view this beautiful movement of technology and humanity coming together from so many different perspectives and angles. So Jose Cordero, I wish he was here, because he would be able to talk about this in so much depth. He's been involved in the Humanity Plus movement and TransVision for a long time. It was their 20th anniversary. They've been holding these events, I believe, every year or every couple of years, and it's the first one I've attended. So essentially, my intention was to go see what are the Europeans talking about, what is their angle and focus. And what I found is they are quite robust in academic prowess. They really, when they present, they have a very high standard of using research and language that's very academic. So that was very nice to see. Natasha Vidamore, of course, was there as one of the heads and board members of Humanity Plus. So was Ben Gertzville. So was David Wood, Paul Spiegel, our colleague out of Belgium as well. The whole board of Humanity Plus, they were there, and they had very high standard of how transhumanism should be messaged in the world. And I think these are experts we need to keep close to, because they are the founders of this movement. They are the academic, the scholarship behind this movement. And what's happening in media, and I believe they're kind of starting to sense it, it's being diluted. It's being, and that's a part of it coming into the world of civilians and non-academics, and everyone has real value in the discussion. But I believe the party would be really key to keep close to that academic core, to keep our language really nice and tight. I mean, I am not an academic, I'm a professional, so I don't have that what Natasha has in the way she speaks about transhumanism, but I make sure I listen to every talk she gives just to encode that language so that, we keep the kind of the academic core where it all began from alive in our work in the world. So that was very enriching. TransVision, if you have a chance to go to the next TransVision, I believe it might be in Portugal or in South America, I'm not sure where, but you will find that you will be just kind of encoded with like a very high level of scholarship in there. And it was also very experiential. There was a neuroscientist out of Portugal who gave us experiential a talk where he showed us how actually using the brain to produce music through technology, it was like, yeah, I feel that more and more and more, if we can give people the experience of the fusion of technology and humanity, that will be a real bonus, because people have to experience this. So that's what I found very enriching. And I highly recommend anyone to go to the Humanity Plus conferences. They are high level because, you know, look at who's running them. The core academics who created this movement, who knows it's in their DNA. So that was my experience there.
Yes, well, thank you very much for sharing your experience. And I will note videos from the TransVision 2018 conference have been released, and they can be found. I believe the organization is that produced the videos is Alianza Futurista. So they have a channel on YouTube where I think all of the videos of the presentations are available now. I would encourage people to look them up. A lot of interesting insights. Speaking of music being able to be composed directly via the human brain, I was entertaining thoughts of this nature. Even when I was a teenager, I was experimenting with melodies on the piano, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to minimize the number of steps between the generation of the idea and its implementation in terms of a work of art, instead of having to go through all of this manual execution, like learning to play an instrument, playing it without errors, recording it, recording the notation. Wouldn't it be great to just think of a melody and then have it manifest in the world?
Sounds like I want to piano practice.
I was definitely more.
And you know, being done, the scientists are already doing this in Porto, in Portugal. If you look up Luis Anjos, he's the one who made the presentation. I believe that the next TransVision conference will be in Portugal, and I'm sure I made him promise that he's going to put us into a dome and have us actually create the music from our brain directly. And he did experientially show that to us in. So yes, it's possible, and this is where it becomes very palatable and exciting and very kind of visceral and tangible. You know, not just ideas or games or transhumanism needs to become very visceral to people. I feel, does it grow corn? Does it nurture us? Is it for real? You know, instead of us. And this is where I felt. Also, when I asked Sophia whether she feels beautiful, I wanted to see whether her level of metaphysical, evolution in the system is able to kind of get at what is truly most important to a healthy human. Do they feel beautiful? Mm-hmm. Do they feel healthy? Do they feel worthy? I mean, that's humanity 101. So bringing that just basic humanity into fusion with technology. It was a great conference, highly recommended.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. Now, we've had a lot of questions and comments on the subjects that were just discussed, and I wanted to bring up a few of them. Lucas Di Matteo asks, what would the Japanese think about artificial wombs? And David Wood says, +1 for the question from Lucas about artificial wombs. Professor Steve Fuller sometimes says transhumanism would make faster progress if we gave more publicity to ectogenesis than life extension. Now, ectogenesis is embraced within the Transhumanist Bill of Rights and the US Transhumanist Party platform, as is the concept of reproductive freedom, autonomy, choice more generally. And it seems to me ectogenesis is a technological solution that can solve a lot of thorny cultural problems if it's possible at least to have the option to develop human beings within artificial wombs. It could, for instance, eliminate the controversies over the abortion issue. Because you could have the current pro-life position and the current pro-choice position prevail simultaneously, and at the same time it could enable significantly greater diversity in parenting. So already in Denmark, there's the phenomenon of the so-called solomor, the single mothers, the women in their late 30s or early 40s who have remained single their entire lives, but they want to reproduce, and they are able to have children through in vitro fertilization and raise the children. And these are typically women of sufficient resources that they can do that and give their children a good upbringing. So could it be possible to have that choice for more people in the future through ectogenesis? I think so, but I'm coming from a very Western perspective as well in terms of focusing on individual autonomy and choice. And I think Lucas asked the question with regard to the Japanese culture, and perhaps Denisa, it might be interesting to consider this in the context of Japan's population issues. Could ectogenesis also help solve that and reverse the declining population trajectory in Japan?
Well, my initial kind of sense, I was not born in Japan. I don't proclaim to have the Japanese soul in deeply ingrained. I lived in Japan for 7 years, and I was married to a Japanese man for 15. So I know somewhat the flavor of, but I can imagine, because womb is related to women, and I know Japanese women and how deeply connected they are to nature. I don't know whether that would be immediately powerfully received by women in Japan. The Japanese women are very, very feminine and very much very connected to nature. Even if they are, even if you find them in, dressed wild and so on, there is very like tangible femininity in them. So I am not sure how the Japanese women would receive that. Would the men create it? Would the society uphold it? If it served the whole of the society, then it would be in the discussion, but it wouldn't be like, I don't think they would rush to it. I don't know. I'll be surprised. I'd love to know the answer from a true Japanese born, raised samurai style, geisha style, like soul. What would Japan do? But immediately, as I know the Japanese women and how closely they are to nature, that it wouldn't be an immediate, oh, let's do it. I don't know. Good question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Denisa, for your thoughts on this. And definitely this is an open question. If anyone with insights as to how it might be perceived in Japanese society has any ideas, please feel free to share either in the chat or later on. Now, before we move on to the next foreign ambassador segment, I did want to mention one thing, because I said I would provide a caveat with regard to my statement that probably we're not going to have a transhumanist president in 2020. As many of you know, the former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, has said he's contemplating an independent run for president. And he is a former member of the Democratic Party, but he believes both parties have lost their way. And he's running as a moderate centrist, but as an independent, he's technically open for us to endorse. Now, whether he would want such an endorsement or agree to such an endorsement is an open question, as is the question of whether he's even going to officially announce his candidacy. But if he is, it might be worthwhile to look at his platform and for someone to conduct an analysis of the similarities and differences with the US Transhumanist Party platform. If we can get Howard Schultz to express sympathies with transhumanist ideas, or even to say that he is a transhumanist, and if he can win as a centrist candidate within an electorate that is tired of essentially the two-party duopoly in the United States, we might have a transhumanist president, technically speaking. So that's my caveat. But a lot of steps would have to occur in exactly the right way along that chain of events. And I can't say whether or not they will, but time will tell. So anyway, with that, let us move on to the next ambassador segment. Palak, would you like to talk about your experiences in India with transhumanist sentiment there and the types of reactions people have had to transhumanist ideas? Yes, I can hear.
Cool. Thanks for inviting me. And so as far as the attitudinal environment in India, current understanding and awareness of transhumanist reflection is not like basically necessarily known by the exact definition or the movement, transhumanist movement, but the ultimate goal of identifying, the use of these speculative scientific framework and emerging technologies to enhance like the human condition is deeply inscribed, I feel, and is kind of like reflected a lot by the scientific and tech communities in India. So like with the recent economic growth and everything, technological progress, and specifically demographic advantages of like millions of people who are coming out of illiteracy and like youngest generation and like the dynamic people, India definitely like has this potential and like a perfect sort of like playground to play for the disruption of these emerging technologies, and like at multiple levels, be it healthcare, smart cities, agriculture, AI, space exploration, and whatnot. So while I agree to the general point of view of transhumanism, I feel like when I meet a lot of Indians and discuss about transhumanism in general, like be it via like India Future Society and other people, I feel like a lot of people I meet have this kind of status quo bias involved, like this thinking where they feel comfortable with the idea and in fact are like kind of committed to trust the evolutionary nature of being, like just the way we are, and growing in the same evolutionary cycle. But like my personal understanding says that evolution has not particularly kind of produced perfectly desirable beings to create this ideal world with minimum suffering or like no suffering at all, if that's even like possible. But then again, like India kind of needs, I think, to tackle its certain challenges in healthcare, education, infrastructure, energy, like basically inequality in general, be it like between rich and poor, men and women. So like I feel like even like 2/3 of Indians are still living in like rural areas, which is far away from the fruits of progress in general. But like so right now, the recent advantages, like if we prioritize, I think the government and the private sector in general is definitely doing a great job in um, overcoming these challenges by by allocating like more budget towards science and technology this last year, or by being like creating these creative spaces for young maker population societies to explore startup India culture in India. So there's been like myriads of startups and like organizations, even big corporations across India are like working towards AI and machine learning and gene therapy, nanotech, biotech, like sustainable development as a whole, or like other interventions, like including each and every kind of disruptive technology. Like it can be considered like a clear sign that India will be able to lead some sort of transhumanist principles and drive the future towards more transhumanistic thoughts in the very near future. So like yeah, like overall and all, like it's basically, I don't feel like it's known by the exact definition of transhumanism in general, but yeah, overall you can get the gist of where and how it's going in India.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for that overview, Palak. And it's interesting too, because India has these contrasts. On the one hand, rapid economic growth, a lot of startups, a lot of highly educated people who are looking to improve their lives and who are open to positive technological change. On the other hand, there is this cultural resistance that you mentioned as well. And because India also has such a large population, there are infrastructure challenges and difficulty in delivering all of these new technologies to all of the people. So it's very interesting how that's going to play out in the coming decades. I certainly hope that we're going to see a continuation of rising living standards and many millions of people being lifted out of poverty, becoming educated, becoming connected to the world.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So now let us proceed to Pam Keefe in Hong Kong. So what is the state of transhumanist sentiment there? And how would you say transhumanist ideas are received?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it's interesting. You know, Hong Kong is the home of Hanson Robotics and Ben Goertzel and Sophia, and it's really become a hub for science, technology, and AI. In Silico Medicine is opening a new office here with Alex Zavranikov. I don't know if I pronounced his name right.
Zavranikov.
Thank you. But there's a lot of interest in AI, in technology, and in the surrounding countries. So in China, there's a biopharma hub in Shanghai and also in Shenzhen. And in Singapore, the government is really promoting businesses and technology advancement to make their home there and to use this as a place to grow and grow technology. So technology is really huge in the population here, especially in the younger generation, in the millennials. There's great interest. But there is a little bit of a dichotomy. There's a problem because with the perception of the U.S. government and what's happening with Huawei. You guys might have seen in the news that the CFO of Huawei was arrested in Canada, and they want to bring her back to the United States. So there's a bad perception of the U.S. Coming from China, and Hong Kong is part of China. So people are afraid to be associated with any organization that's labeled a U.S. political party. So from that standpoint, they're really interested in what we're doing. They're interested in technology. But when it comes to actually joining our party and being part of our movement, what we're doing, there's a huge hesitation to become involved and to even join the party and have on paper that you are part of an American political party. So this is something I want to think through as a group on how we can get more international members and people to become, part of this and overcome this perception. Maybe this is a chance for people outside the US to have a vote on what's happening and to actually make a say, because they're not going to be able to have a say in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but the Transhumanist Party, they can vote. I just asked and clarified that they can vote. So I think that's exciting.
Absolutely. We are the first political party to implement this concept of allied members, where people who are not residents of the United States can still cast ballots in our internal votes. Now, obviously, they wouldn't be able to vote in US elections for public office, but in terms of helping us make decisions about policy planks or about which candidates we endorse, they are definitely able to have a voice. And this is important because really, transhumanism is an international movement, and it speaks to universal issues about improving the human condition and overcoming the limitations that have shackled us. So it's interesting you mentioned Alex Zavranikov, whose 40th birthday is today, and he wrote an article on Forbes magazine, which I shared because he says that's the best birthday present that anyone can give him, is to share that article. And in that article, he mentioned how really differences of nationality, of class, of wealth, of status, of ethnicity, of religion, what have you, are triflingly insignificant compared to the nemesis of biological aging that we all face and we all have to contend against. And if we, as the human species, can unite in overcoming this nemesis, then I think we have a fighting chance within all of our lifetimes. And that is core to the mission of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. So we're the U.S. Transhumanist Party out of pragmatic considerations, because it's still the case that the majority of transhumanists are based in the United States. But over time, we hope that that's going to change, and we hope to be the impetus behind that change. And it's so unfortunate that there are these geopolitical tensions, which are completely unnecessary right now. And I do blame the Trump administration in the United States for precipitating these trade wars, including with China, out of nothing, for no provocation whatsoever. Not to mention that protectionism and retaliatory tariffs, quotas, sanctions, what have you, are completely futile and undermine living standards here. And I wish that residents, as well as governments outside of the United States, understood that the United States Transhumanist Party does not stand for the escalation of these kinds of geopolitical tensions at all. We do not want a world where conflict is more likely. We want a world where every potential source of conflict can be mitigated and eliminated. So we want the free exchange of information. We want the free association of people. We want the free movement of goods. And anyone in the world who has sympathies with these ideas is welcome to associate with us. We are not in any manner arms of the U.S. federal government, and we do not embrace the current federal government's foreign policy. So hopefully that will help, but I do see the problem because people may be worried about how their affiliations are perceived, and it's consistent with my observation that we have surprisingly few members in China generally, and most of the members we do have in China are expatriates of the United States or European countries.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we can take that as a challenge for our future growth.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But as you mentioned, Hong Kong is a high-tech hub with many transhumanists based there. And China is also fast becoming a high-tech hub. So it will be interesting to see how that evolves and what parallel concepts to the ideas of transhumanism might even emerge independently over there. So it's interesting too. Lucas Di Moveo asks some questions for you, Pam. He asks, Pam, what do you think the political fallout would be of having members in the PRC, the People's Republic of China? And then he also asks, is there a chance of us contacting a low-level official in Singapore or China? Perhaps that could clear up potential future mishaps. So I'll let you answer those.
Yeah, actually, I think that I'll answer the second one first, because I think that's a great suggestion. And I was sort of thinking the same thing. What if we were to contact some of these local governments? I think especially Singapore, who wants to be forward-thinking, might be quite open to having a chat with us. And if we were to have one of these governments understand what we're doing and align with us, that might strengthen us overall, maybe even in the U.S. political race. If we have some foreign governments who see what we're doing and feel that they have a chance to align with a party that is more like-minded.
Yes.
So I think that's a very interesting suggestion.
Yeah.
And then as far as members in PRC, that's where it's tough. There is a definite, if you are a citizen of the PRC, you don't have a political voice. You are part of the we of China, and you don't have the same kind of freedom of choice when it comes to politics that we do in the United States. So that's why there's a real reluctance to actually be a member. Maybe we can think of some other way just to have them follow what we're doing, and not be exact members, but I don't know, we have to think through how that can work, but there's definitely a reluctance, a great reluctance or fear. I would go so far as to say that.
Yes, and that's duly noted. We actually have a a gentleman in Kazakhstan who has interacted with us, but he was reluctant to even be called a foreign ambassador of the U.S. Transhumanist Party because he was concerned that the government of Kazakhstan would exact retribution on anyone affiliated with a political party outside of Kazakhstan. So what we did for him was we listed him on our website as a representative of the worldwide transhumanist movement. So perhaps we can emphasize the worldwide aspect of what we're trying to do, and really that the US political arena is a vehicle for our larger aspirations, which are more globally encompassing. Along these lines, I've been thinking of an idea. It may come to fruition sometime this year, but also having an apolitical affiliate of the Transhumanist Party, which would be called the Transhuman Club. And the Transhuman Club would be engaged in discussions of ideas, again, in an international context. And these ideas could feed into policy suggestions for the Transhumanist Party, ultimately. But people could join the Transhuman Club and be active and be involved. And if they want to skirt around the political aspects, if they're not comfortable in a given jurisdiction, they might be able to achieve that. Or if they're genuinely apolitical and just want to discuss philosophy or science, they could do that in the Transhuman Club. So we'll see how that works out. I still need to take a few more steps before this happens, but it could help here. And Denisa is making a suggestion about the Transhuman Society. It's up for discussion what the name would be. I will have another segment where I'll talk about names as well. But Lucas was asking.
I believe they had actually had a question as well, just above Lucas did. That was towards Pam as well in regards to her knowledge in China.
Ah, yes, I see it now. Okay, how much effect do you feel Cixin Liu's, that's spelled Cixinliu, and other similar Chinese science fiction authors' books have affected transhumanist thoughts in China? And this is from Dante Kniegel. He says, I know the Wandering Earth movie, based on Cixin Liu's book, just became the second highest grossing film in Chinese history.
There's a huge interest in China in technology, and there is an interest. They don't call it transhumanism, but they're interested in merging with technology. There's no question about that. And there's a version of Chinese Netflix, similar to Netflix, but it's in China, and where they're making films, and then you can download them on your phone from your laptop. And this is super popular right now. And there's also social media through something called WeChat, which you've probably heard of. And WeChat, there's a lot of pages, there's a lot of activity with people sharing thoughts and ideas, and writing blog posts and things like that. So I think there is a real growing interest and movement, but it's not how we think of transhumanism, but it is technology merging with us and technology rapidly growing. So I think that if we can figure out a way, maybe we need to have someone in China as an ambassador. If we could get even an expat to do that was based there, to capture this this market. I think if we understood China better and how to work with them, it could help all of us.
Yes. They are. And actually, I have the ideal expat in mind to serve as our foreign ambassador to China, but he may be quite busy at the moment. He used to be our director of recruitment, Martin van der Kroon, before he moved to China. And he has still been active within the party in various discussions, but I hope at some point he may have enough availability that he could do that, because I think his voice and his influence and his understanding and ability to convey insights from that culture would be without parallel. But time will tell whether this will happen. Now, I think we've had a great discussion from our foreign ambassadors. I will want to move on to the next subject that I wanted to raise, particularly because it does have some relationship to names and potential names, as we discussed. And some of this even reminds me of the Monty Python comedy, The Life of Brian. If any of you have seen it, there's a segment there where during this fictional history of the early Roman Empire and various sects of Judaism that were competing with one another at that time, essentially during the 1st century CE, there was the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea, and they couldn't stand one another. And they had their fiercest rhetoric devoted to essentially bad-mouthing the other. So I kind of feel that over the past few years, we've had a situation of this sort in the transhumanist community, where we had the Transhumanist Party, which has been by far the most prevalent political party in the United States from a transhumanist perspective, with the greatest number of members. But we also had the Transhuman Party, which was a splinter party of 25 members, and it intentionally limited itself to 25 members because it was an experiment in a leaderless organization where there would be no hierarchies, no single decision makers. It was a noble, idealistic vision, but essentially a few people ended up doing most of the work because nobody else was active. And those people kind of recognized the futility of it after a while. And one of them, who owned the domain name to the website of the Transhuman Party, ultimately decided the experiment had failed, and he sold me the domain. And he essentially also let me know who the other original members were. I reached out to them, and about half of them accepted my offer to join the US Transhumanist Party. Along with that offer to join the Transhumanist Party, they and we also now have a prerogative to use the name Transhuman Party to refer to ourselves. And I made that decision for two reasons. One, out of respect to the original Transhuman Party and what they were trying to do, and the fact that their voices do matter. And we hope that their voices will find a home within the US Transhumanist Party / Transhuman Party. But the other reason why I made that choice is it can give people a way to bypass what I think is an age-old misunderstanding. And that is, when Zoltan Istvan founded the Transhumanist Party, he actually obtained successfully a trademark on the name Transhumanist Party. The only reason why he did that was to essentially protect the name against usurpation by people who would not be friendly to what we are trying to do. So nobody else would be able to call themselves the Transhumanist Party and stop us from calling ourselves the Transhumanist Party, unless, of course, they were to become members of the Transhumanist Party and follow the channels and processes that we have set up, which are open to participation by virtually anyone who has something constructive to offer. So essentially, that trademark was a purely defensive move, but it was misunderstood by a lot of people. And we have in our FAQ a section devoted to it precisely to dispel that misunderstanding. But the misunderstanding was the perception that Zoltan was somehow trying to monopolize de facto control over the Transhumanist Party, and I can tell you for a fact he has none. And he is not a decision maker right now, though he is welcome to give advice, as is anybody else. But essentially, some people don't want to use a trademarked name. The name Transhuman Party is not trademarked right now. The original Transhuman Party tried to trademark it, and it didn't work. They were only able to get a limited trademark on the use of the name on T-shirts, essentially. And then they withdrew it, recognizing that it wouldn't actually serve their original purpose. But in fact, nobody can trademark the name Transhuman Party because that attempt would be rejected as being too similar to the name Transhumanist Party. But nonetheless, it's not a trademark term. So if anyone has an issue with Zoltan trademarking the term Transhumanist Party, they can use the term Transhuman Party, refer to the same organization, and work with us and collaborate with us on what we're trying to do, which is to have a member-driven, small d democratic organization. So I'm trying to resolve this conundrum and maybe bring in some people who would have reservations otherwise. We'll see how it works out. But before I go on to the next stage of my update, I will recognize Denisa. Thank you for participating today. I know you had to leave, as you indicated previously, but we appreciated your insights. Now, the next development, also within the internal dynamics of the transhumanist community, relates to the recent dissolution of another organization called the Transhuman National Committee of the United States, or TNC. And actually, the TNC was a kind of, I would say, oligarchic organization. If the US Transhumanist Party is more small d democratic, the TNC was a more concentrated group. It had a board of directors that met every few months. And actually on its board of directors, there were representatives of various other transhumanist organizations. So as the US Transhumanist Party, we had a seat on the board of directors, and I was present there. BJ had actually been there even before the leadership changes with the US Transhumanist Party. So in effect, we had two members on the board of the TNC, but far from the majority. And the TNC was formed in 2015. It wasn't explicitly an organization that ever opposed the Transhumanist Party or Zoltan, but it had its own plan, essentially. It wanted to form a lobbying organization, a political action committee, essentially, and attempt to influence politics in Washington, D.C. by that mechanism. They never did actually officially form a PAC, because to do so would have required a significant amount of funding, and ultimately their funding source decided to discontinue that support. So the TNC actually closed in January of 2019. And during the last board meeting of the TNC, BJ, you and I were both present, and we know what happened. I attempted to put forward a statement for the TNC to issue, essentially inviting TNC members to join the US Transhumanist Party / Transhuman Party now, and essentially continue their involvement there. Because, again, we would welcome their support. Unfortunately, the chair of the TNC at that time had different ideas, and he thought the only feasible way forward was to work within one of the two political parties, which is a significant disagreement that he and I have. But he had some proxy votes at his disposal, and his proxy votes enabled him to eke out a slim majority in that board vote and essentially have his statement put forward at the dissolution of the TNC rather than the statement that the Transhumanist Party had proposed. And that was unfortunate, but because we are the remaining extant organization, we did ultimately issue our own statement on these developments, which I think has received more exposure than the TNC statement. But I have continued to extend that invitation to members of the former TNC. Please join us. It's absolutely free. We're not forming a PAC. We're not going to pay lobbyists. We're not going to be in a position where we are dependent on an external funding source. That's one of the big advantages of being a non-monetary organization. We don't have to worry about any of that. But we do have this difference of perspective with some in the transhumanist community, in that we do think transhumanism needs a political home to stand on its own, not to essentially be one minor current subsumed within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I think that's a discussion that will continue to be had, but it's interesting that there are these differences, and hopefully over time people will recognize the importance of having a unique place for this new political paradigm and for this longer term vision of the future, which is what we're trying to provide. But BJ, I wanted to hear if you have any thoughts on the TNC situation and what happened, and anything it might suggest going forward.
Well, like you, I found it to be a bit unfortunate as to how it concluded. You know, like a lot of us, we saw a lot of potential in what the TNC was trying to formulate. I especially enjoyed their creation of the Transhuman House over in Utah. I thought that was a great effort that was very creative, and something that anybody within the transhumanist community should definitely consider themselves if they ever want to pursue larger projects like that. That would definitely be something that I believe the Transhumanist Party would support and follow up on. But yeah, in terms of how they organized and how it all concluded, it was definitely within a lot of our foresight as to what might have happened with them, given how connected that they wanted to be financially within the political system when it was deeply problematic from the get-go. So we saw how it concluded, and that's just something we can all, I guess, learn from, especially as the USTP continues moving forward.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, BJ. And along these lines, I have a video series that I would recommend, a short 2-part video series called The Great Transhumanist Game, in which I essentially make the point that if we play the game of established politics by the rules of established politics, we're going to lose. And the only way we can win is by playing the transhumanist game, which is distinctly different with different objectives. Dan Elton states along these lines, I also think we should try to learn from the demise of the TNC. In brief, I think that infighting was part of the demise. And yes, I would agree with that. There was a lot of procedurally adversarial behavior in the TNC when, if there were differences of perspective, the party that tried to get a slim majority would essentially do so pretty much at all costs within the only constraints of the Roberts Rules of Order. And this is quite a contrast with how the USTP makes decisions, and that we do try to reach a consensus wherever possible and discuss the issues and see the other perspectives and see if we can find any common ground. So I really think, in terms of how decisions are made, the size of the group matters, as well as the prior interactions, the relationships that have formed within the group. So if there's a small group setting where everyone knows everyone and we can discuss the issues, consensus is quite feasible. We don't even need Robert's Rules of Order because those are more suitable for larger gatherings where you need certain formulaic processes to make things work. In a larger setting, for instance, the membership of the USTP as a whole, we now have 1,310 members. It wouldn't be feasible to get a consensus from each individual, so we have a voting system. And the voting system enables us to make decisions on policy planks, for instance, where not everybody is going to agree. But even in those votes, we find that we generally have a preponderance of the membership at least leaning one way, and they may have issues with wording here or there. But if it's a real serious conceptual difference, it's not a 51% to 49% split. Generally speaking, we see about an 80% to a 20% split, even though we try to be very transpartisan and inclusive of many conventional political perspectives. So it is definitely something to learn from, not just in terms of what objectives we have within the political arena, but how we conduct ourselves and how we try to reconcile any differences that we have. So anyway, let us proceed, because we have a lot of other interesting updates for our members. And I'll preface the next update by saying, in April of this year, our education and media advisor, who is also the chair of the California Transhumanist Party, Newton Lee, is planning to release a book, a compilation of essays, which is now to be titled the Transhumanism Handbook. And it is going to be published by Springer Nature. Hopefully it will get the attention of some academic outlets as well as the general public. And Newton Lee has done an excellent job curating this book, soliciting contributions from many officers and active members of the USTP, as well as other transhumanist experts. And one of the people who will have a chapter in this book is Dinorah Delfin, who has written an essay. I've had a chance to read essentially the preview version of the essay, called An Artist's Creative Process, a Model of Conscious Evolution. So Dinorah, if you would discuss your forthcoming contribution to that book.
Yeah, thank you, Gennady. And by the way, thank you so much, everybody. Can you hear me? Because I cannot.
Yes.
Right? I'm trying to have the...
By the way, thank you so much.
Yes, I can hear you right now.
Okay, okay, because I have both windows from Google Hangouts and the YouTube page, and I hear a lot of echo.
Because I have both windows from...
Yes. So you can actually pause your playback of the YouTube video. Just click pause. You'll still hear updates from the chat, but that way you won't hear the echo.
Okay. So, yes. First of all, thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here with everybody. Arin, BJ, Denisa, who I've been wanting to meet her for a long time, and she just left. Tom, welcome to the party. It's a great pleasure to have new people joining us. The essay that will be published in the forthcoming book, the Transhumanist Handbook, has been a great opportunity for me to reflect on issues about transhumanism. And at the same time, it gave me an opportunity to talk about my own art, and especially the way that I create art. I have focused on the creative process, which I believe is a way for anybody to have more insight on a specific subject. And what was most fascinating about this experience in creating my own artwork is that it eventually led me to explore transhumanism. I actually realized that I was a transhuman a long time ago. I started creating art about hypothetical hybrid beings over 10 years ago without realizing that I was being part of a movement that already existed. And so this, I guess this process of creating art in many ways reminds me of many values that are, um, um, how do you say, there are, um, I forget that word, but a lot of the values of the transhumanist body, which the way that I see transhumanism is a way to learn about the person and a way to learn about the self beyond the, I guess, the public conception of merging with technology and all the focus being on enhancement. The way that I see it is an opportunity for the human being to be able to reflect on what the human being is and being able to reflect on our nature and the way that we perceive ourselves and the many possibilities of our own expressions. And to me, that's what I appreciate the most about the movement and how it relates to my art and how my art eventually led me to the movement. So yes, I guess I'm very, very grateful to be part of this book. There will be about 60 people, 60 transhumanists, all from many different backgrounds and different perspectives. And I'm very, very excited to be part of it. There are great people like Miss Natasha Vitamor, and there will be Liz Parrish, Jose Cordero. They're all, even yourself, Gennady, will be also
Thank
part
you.
of the book. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book, and just very grateful to be part of it and be part of this family, which has been a very, very profound, amazing, just wild, magical experience. And I really wish that more people really understood what we are about and they could see through the popular vision that the way that transhumanism is portrayed out there, which brings, I know, back to that question that we will be discussing later about whether we should engage with people who are creating all these almost conspiracy-like theories, which when I look at it, it sounds just plain ridiculous. Knowing, especially knowing all these wonderful people that are being part of this movement and how normal actually we are.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Dinorah, and I'm touched to have heard those remarks. I think you have been tremendously effective in your advocacy for transhumanism over what is now more than the past year. But even before then, I think for at least 12 years, you've been a transhumanist without knowing it. And a lot of people, I think, are also in that position where their ideas and their work are quintessentially transhumanist, but they don't use that term to describe themselves, and they may not even be aware of that term. And there are artists who fall into that category. There are scientists who fall into that category. I think there are politicians and policymakers who could also fall into that category. And one of our roles, I think, as the US Transhumanist Party is to find those individuals and bring them in and show them what transhumanism actually means and how they are transhumanists already. And indeed, we have the I am transhuman hashtag, where people can use that hashtag to identify aspects of their lives today which benefit from emerging technologies or even technologies that have long been in existence, such as, say, pacemakers or eyeglasses or computers. Those are also transhuman enhancements that expand our creative abilities and our ability to transform the world. So thank you very much, Dinorah, for that overview. We look forward to having your chapter in the Transhumanism Handbook once it's released. I'll mention one more thing about the Transhumanism Handbook. This is the book that I hope anyone considering to be the presidential nominee for the USTP will obtain and read. And it's one reason why I plan to begin the official campaign season in April, because if the book is available then, people will have a chance to obtain it, and then maybe we'll have some of these individuals who don't know that they're transhumanists yet discover that they are and want to run for president with our party. So in terms of people who have run for president, of course, our founder, Zoltan Istvan, did run in 2016, and it was a famous, iconic run now. There was a documentary recently created about it called Immortality or Bust. And Arin, you were in the fortunate position of actually attending the world premiere of that documentary. So if you could discuss that, I think our audience would be quite interested.
Absolutely, Gennady. Thanks for the lovely introduction. And yes, I was fortunate enough to have been able to attend the world premiere held at the Raw Science Film Festival at the Ace Hotel in downtown Los Angeles last month. And I should also add that it was an absolute pleasure to meet Zoltan Istvan in person, as well as his lovely family. And of course, be able to watch the premiere of Immortality or Bust, as well as several other great movies. So I won't spend too much time on it, but I think what really stood out for me in this movie, there were a lot of themes that were discussed. However, to me, I think it was really about three major themes. One of them, of course, the obvious one, life extension, as well as Zoltan's presidential candidacy, but also what was weaved throughout the movie, and which I particularly appreciated, was Zoltan's family and his relationship with his family members, in particular his father, who unfortunately passed away. I was unable to meet him at the premiere, although I met Zoltan's mother. And so that's what I thought really gave the movie a kind of tender feel. This isn't just a movie about someone's presidential candidacy. This isn't just a movie about driving a coffin bus across the country, although that did occur. This isn't just a movie about promoting life extension. This is a movie that I really believe will inspire us to take a deeper look at ourselves, in particular to address something that many of us, or most of us, we put off for another day. But what happens when we lose someone dear to us? And unfortunately, it happens all the time, and it's going to continue happening unless we do something about it. And so I think this movie, the beauty of this movie was asking these deeper questions, in particular to me, whether you are a supporter of life extension or longevity or whatever you would like to call it, how are you going to feel when somebody close to you passes away? How are you going to deal with the pain of loss? And more importantly, what can each person do? What can all of us do to work together to improve the human condition, Now, in this case, it would be life extension and enabling people to live longer and healthier. What can we all do? What can each of us do? And what can all of us do together as a society, as a world, to enable humans to live longer, healthier, more fulfilling, more dignified lives? Because I think at the end of the day, that's what it's really about, is how can we enable everyone from all walks of life, any socioeconomic condition, any religion, any geographical area, to live a fulfilling and dignified life. And so that, to me, that's actually one of the biggest reasons I became involved with transhumanism, was being able to do my very small part to help move this forward. So I think that that was another one of the deeper themes within the movie, which I would urge people to look into. Of course, the movie itself is fascinating. It's not flashy, but it's fascinating, and you get a really personal look at Zoltan and what kind of person he is, and just the journey that he went, driving the Immortality bus across the country, and the various challenges he had, with the bus breaking down, and with the number of interesting people he gets to meet along the way. So I thought the movie was beautifully done. It wasn't flashy, but then again, it didn't need to be. I think it communicated what I believe it intended to communicate. And I would urge everyone to watch the movie, whether or not they're a transhumanist, whether you agree with life extension or not. Watch the movie. You might learn something about yourself too. You might be inspired to take action on some of the themes that are discussed in the movie.
Yes, thank you very much, Arin, for your report and your impressions of the film. I think you are exactly on target. I did see the film myself, and it was very poignant. I'll leave it at that in terms of my own comments, though I may write more about it later on. But definitely it did a great deal to give us a glimpse into what Zoltan's experiences were like, and what it was like to be at that early stage of political transhumanism. Right now, we're essentially at the next stage in terms of building up our party, our infrastructure, our membership, our worldwide reach. But Zoltan did lay a lot of the groundwork single-handedly at that time. And I do think it is important for us to understand that history, for us to appreciate what he did in raising the public profile and public awareness of transhumanism, even as he was dealing with some very difficult personal situations. I will say I have great sympathy for what he was going through with the illness and then the death of his father. That was just a total tragedy. His father was a great man, and the world is poorer without him. So with that, I will point out Dan Elton has stated he's interested in hosting a screening of Immortality or Bust with the DC Transhumanists, and will be reaching out to Daniel Solinger, who produced the film, very soon. And he also says documentary screenings on transhumanism should be a good place to recruit new members. However, if it is a public event, you need permission / by rights. So if there's a documentary out there by an independent filmmaker that someone who is a member of the USTP wants to screen, contact the filmmaker, see if you can come up with an arrangement. And I agree, it would be great publicity for spreading awareness of transhumanist ideas.
There's actually a film that I actually served as a tech advisor for. It's not necessarily a documentary, but it was with a friend of mine. He was the director and producer of the film, Tim Maupin, and the film was called The Last Generation to Die. Yeah. And it actually revolves around similar topics of what it would be like to experience family members that or family or friends or anybody close to you that you love who happen to be that last generation to die just before life extension and longevity passes along to everybody in society. And so those type of questions they're deep and meaningful. They definitely hit the heart, hit the emotional impulse that a lot of people operate on, and would definitely reflect probably a lot better towards the transhumanist movement and community as a whole than the simple ideas of trying to push forward science and technology and logic. People really gravitate towards emotional appeal. So films like that, whether it be Immortality or Bust or The Last Generation to Die, films like that, I believe, will be our greatest tool in reaching out to a broader audience.
Yes, indeed. And I am pleased to say I was actually one of the people who crowdfunded the initial creation of The Last Generation to Die. This was back in 2013, I believe, that the filmmakers initially raised funds for it. And I'm glad the film got produced. The production quality is excellent. Now, the ending of the film is a bit ambiguous in that we don't know what decision that family member of the scientist is actually going to make. And I won't give away too many details of the film. I'll just leave it at that. But perhaps the film is asking the question that many of us should be asking, and that is, as these future advances become available, what choices will individuals make regarding whether and how to use them? And some of those questions may be ones we will have to pose personally, because we each probably have family members who have different perspectives from our own on emerging technologies, transhumanism, life extension, whether or not to avail oneself of medical progress. So definitely a worthwhile film to look at, and also perhaps for some people to screen. But our next topic of discussion, I think, ties into this nicely, in that we are seeking for a variety of ways to appeal to the general public. And I think, BJ, you're correct. Some people are more persuaded by rational argumentation or scientific evidence. Other people are more persuaded by emotional appeal or stories or films. And those are not mutually exclusive approaches. There's room for all of them within our movement. But I think one crucial objective that encompasses this array of approaches would be our goal of reaching 10,000 members. And I keep emphasizing this goal because I think 10,000 members is a crucial threshold for an organization to become self-sustaining, for the vicissitudes of individual life circumstances to no longer get in the way of the smooth operation of the organization, in the sense that, let's say, if I were to take a vacation, or if one of you were to take a vacation, what would happen to the USTP in the meantime? Right now, I'm still rather worried about that. And my vacation time, as a result, has been rather limited. And I wish I could say I don't let myself get sick for that particular reason as well. I wish I had that power, but we are still in the year 2019, and the reality is perhaps less palatable than that. But I want to get to 10,000 members in the USTP so that we always have a strong core of active members who will continue to pursue projects, who will continue to update our website, who will continue to reach out to new individuals, discuss transhumanism, advance the policy deliberations where transhumanism has a bearing. And there are several crucial questions in that regard. For instance, what demographics have yet to be exposed to transhumanist ideas and the existence of the USTP? And how can we be more effective in getting people in the door, so to speak, to be even aware of our existence and our content? I get the impression that once people are in the door, overwhelmingly, we are favorably viewed. in the sense that if people take the time to study our website, our videos, our modes of interaction, our tone, most of them are favorable. There are always going to be some who dislike us or criticize us for whatever reasons. Some criticisms may be valid, others may be more personally driven. But the vast majority of people who know about us do not have a negative view and are open to collaboration with us. But we are still a fairly minor political party. We have 1,310 members. We don't have 10,000. We don't have 1 million. But a lot of transhumanists I've spoken with have said they're a bit perplexed as to why that is, why millions of people right now aren't saying that they're transhumanists and aren't joining the transhumanist party. So we have some untapped demographics. We have some ways that we could utilize better in terms of getting people into the door. And before I speak about some more specific potential ideas, I would like to hear general thoughts from any of you on these issues and what can we do to achieve that 10,000 member milestone.
In my opinion, I think one of the, can you hear me okay? I had to switch machines.
Yeah.
Would be to really hone the message a little bit. It's hard to explain to people what a transhumanist is if they're unfamiliar with it. They have, of course, some of the pop culture references, but that doesn't do us a whole lot of good a lot of times. So if there was I mean, we've got the core ideals, but if there was a simple elevator pitch that we could all agree on, just to hone down what it is to be a transhumanist.
Yes.
Or to point out the fact that somebody else may be one and they don't know.
Right. And it's worthwhile to think about that and to think about how to articulate it. And we have the core ideals, as you mentioned. The core ideals are fairly concise, but the core ideals mostly speak about the objectives of the Transhumanist Party. What sort of world do we want to see? The question, what is transhumanism? It has a detailed academic answer, which I've provided before. I will not go into it here because I'm assuming our audience is familiar with it, but it takes a while to articulate it. There's a simpler answer that I really like from Dr. Bill Andrews. Transhumanism is about making life better through science and technology. So that's, I think, something that could definitely be part of that elevator pitch you mentioned, Tom. Because everyone, I think, is interested in improving life, unless they're depressed or suicidal or nihilistic. But we hope that the majority of people, no matter what their ideological persuasions or worldviews, will want tomorrow to be better than today. And that really is part of the transhumanist aspiration. So anyone else have insights on this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, great point so far. Tom, you really nailed it. Having these core talking points, also across multiple platforms, and whether it's social media, well, it's mostly social media because that's a really effective way to reach a larger number of people. So having these core talking points, and then having this consistent message across multiple platforms. Tom, you also mentioned being able to engage people. You know, Charlie Cam has talked about this before, famous people. I recently found out that the DJ Steve Aoki is a transhumanist. Mm-hmm. Well, imagine if we can get him to make a mention of it, right? That would be really favorable. You know, so he would also be known for that, and not just his music or throwing cake on people, you know, during his shows. It would also be, I mean, we could really leverage this to get the word out. So I really do believe if there's some more famous transhumanists, we should engage them. We should try to spread the word. Related to that too is there was another question about what segments of the population should we engage? Young people, absolutely young people, and it'll sort of catch on like wildfire. But in order to do that, I also think too, we've got to, in some way, change the public perception of transhumanism and what it is, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there, and we should do our best in order to address those and really just offer the public what it is that we're about. So I think all of those are crucial.
Yes, thank you, Arin. And I'll point out, you had broached with me previously the idea of hosting a transhumanist rave. I wonder if DJ Steve Aoki could be present at said transhumanist rave.
I wish. No, so my plan is still to do one this summer. I don't know whether it's going to, I'm currently working on it. As for whether we could get Steve Aoki, it might be kind of tough, but at this stage, I'd just like to have one. Maybe we just have a small one and we just build from there, right?
Yes, indeed. A party in more senses than one. I also have my enlightenment salons, which are parties of a sort. Not the same as a rave, I know, but appeal to different demographics. So, along these lines, any further suggestions, thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to pop in with one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think what we need to do to bring more people in is to have a clear message of what's the benefit to anybody to being part of our group. One or two things that they'll understand really simply and clearly, that if they join, it's going to benefit them, like helping to be, I don't know how to get the words around it, but we need to think through what I would call in our business side the value proposition to the members. So, having a vote in what's happening. So if we can clearly think of a couple of simple things about how it's going to benefit them, then I think we can pull more people in.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. The value proposition is crucial. And I can think of several points for the value proposition right now. Having the ability to vote in our internal elections is clearly the most significant one that distinguishes a member from a non-member, because we still interact with the non-members, and hopefully they have something constructive to contribute to our deliberations. But also, members have certain benefits. We did create a guide, essentially tips for advancing a brighter future, where we collected some insights from many of our advisors. And the only way to get that guide for free is to become a member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. And then another benefit that we were able to get through our allies at Amplacell Medical, which is a stem cell clinic and research facility, are some discounts on certain stem cell procedures for individuals who have a medical need for them. So those are some of the benefits that we have right now. Hopefully there will be more benefits to come. And I think one more general benefit is that by becoming a member, one becomes involved in this broader community that we have formed, that has very much coalesced around the USTP. So, Arin, in our internal discussions, you mentioned being able to interact with like-minded people worldwide, being able to advocate for causes that are important to you and start working on things you're passionate about, like longevity and curing disease. And indeed, as we grow, we create a larger network, and we create a more organized network than what has existed in the transhumanist movement prior to the USTP. My impression of the transhumanist movement prior to the USTP is that it has been somewhat fragmented, splintered, and there were different factions. Not all of the factions were necessarily receptive to one another, and to some extent that's still the case. But I think recent developments are going to help us move away from this life of Brian situation and towards something more cohesive and more constructive. And the more people join us, the easier it will be to achieve that. And we've had some great suggestions in the chat as well. So one suggestion from Lucas Di Matteo was that we should reach out to small political YouTube channels to propose discussions and essentially interact with people with different perspectives. And I actually think this is a good bridge into a topic I wanted to address, and that is not all of these other YouTube channels are necessarily friendly to transhumanism or the transhumanist party. Some of them are the Alex Jones type conspiracy theorists who think that transhumanists are part of the Illuminati New World Order, nefariously planning to enslave everybody else and subjugate them under the new robot overlords that are beholden to the Illuminati New World Order. And this is seriously what some of them think. And some of them even think that I'm a cyborg because my hair looks perfect and I don't blink in the older frame rate videos. Seriously, I've seen comments like, nobody's hair could actually look this way.
Have you taken the Turing test? How do we know?
Oh, that's funny. That is funny. But I think, Tom, you raised a suggestion to me about actually interacting with these types of people and channels. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, just in general, I think it's good for the party to have that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
That emotional intelligence about our brand, that there is that narrative, that opposite narrative of what we're trying to do that's out there. And by ignoring it, it will only feed itself. You know, by ignoring it, we will give it a reason to continue. Instead, you know, as a part of trying to control the narrative, which is fresh, brand new. In fact, you know, it might be good to ask people why they were transhumanists. But to just control the narrative to engage these people. But the idea being that these things are inevitable. Everything that we're talking about, every plank in the platform is an inevitability, one way or the other. But this is the only group that is discussing them as policy, because they're going to happen. Somebody's got to get their head around that. So it's a matter of to partly control our narrative or protect our message. It would be to engage these people, if not to allay their fears, then to just understand what the fears are, why they're generating it, and to address it. Because again, the saving grace of all of this is that we are the one organization that is approaching this as policy, as a intellectual conversation.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And
so that's the idea, is to go into the belly of the beast and just engage them.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I'm sympathetic to this. And I actually recall Zoltan actually had an interview on the Alex Jones show when he was running for president. He wasn't interviewed by Alex Jones himself. He was interviewed by one of his co-hosts. That co-host was more level-headed than Alex Jones, in my impression. And he came from more of a conservative Christian perspective rather than a rabidly paranoid perspective. But the host essentially asked Zoltan about whether transhumanist aspirations were somehow compromising our humanity, or what about the impact on privacy or individual liberties. I actually thought it was a fairly intelligent and civil conversation. Now, that being said, there's a reason why conspiracy theorists are conspiracy theorists, and that is the workings of their minds are not rational. And in many respects, the way their minds work could lead to some extremely dangerous and damaging consequences for those who engage with them. And the reason for that is conspiracy theorists have an extreme case of confirmation bias, and they cherry pick facts from the external reality and assemble them into their chosen narrative. Sometimes they stretch those facts far beyond what a reasonable person would do. But when they do that, anything and everything could just confirm their pre-existing suspicion. So the more we engage with them, some of them might just have a debate with us, and that's okay. I'm happy to have a debate with conservative Christians
It just froze up.
Hello?
Did we lose Gennady?
It froze up, I think.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it looks like it froze. Hopefully it's only momentarily.
Yeah, give him a minute. Maybe he can figure it out.
Yep. But I think, yeah, just to continue what Gennady was saying until he comes back. Absolutely. So I think it's having a good balance. There are always going to be people who are critical. There are always going to be people who don't agree. And at the end of the day, you can't convince every single person on earth to agree with you. I think what's really important for us is to stick to the topic, to stick to our goals, what we're focused on, and display our projects and the things we're working on calmly, rationally, and with the hopes that as we demonstrate our successes, then the more people will be on board. But at the end of the day, you can't convince everybody, and nor do I believe should it be our responsibility to do so. I really do think we should help the people who really are sympathetic and who really want to be helped. People who are suffering from rare disease and have nowhere to go to. People who are dealing with crippling poverty. We should be focused on of course, helping as many people as possible. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to be everything to everyone. And no matter what you do, no matter how good and noble and decent and kind and compassionate you are, you're always going to have people who might not agree with you, and that's okay.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. It's like, I would think the core ideal to keep in mind, if anybody who went into these situations, would be that these things are inevitable. They are happening. We are human beings that are trying to form policy around these things before they get out of hand. But believe it or not, we are the human resistance. We are trying to get a structure around this thing. And even if we go into an Alex Jones or whomever and they attack, if we keep that centered state of mind. But it's also a good time to take advantage of the dark side of transhumanism, because it'll get people talking. And if we come on and we stick to certain edicts or certain frames of mind, certain talking points, there may be people in the audience that we can turn, reasonable people, maybe not the host, but you see that a lot. You see people going into Fox and sticking to their guns, that type of thing. So I think it's just a matter of just not being afraid, but really taking on the mantle of being, this is a real human resistance to something that's coming one way or the other. We're just trying to put a structure around it. And if they saw it that way, we might gain some converts. And it's also about talking about the beautiful stuff. It's the hearing that children have now, and eyes and prosthetics, and just really focusing on the beautiful part, like Dinorah does, about the organic aspect of life extension accessory. So at the same time, go into the steampunk cauldron and whip up some membership too.
There's also the and I definitely agree with you, Tom, on trying to engage with the people that, like the conspiracy theorists, who, even when we say that a lot of this stuff is inevitable, for them, they're probably, all they're going to be hearing is, or thinking is, that we're akin to the Borg, and we're essentially saying is resistance is futile. But even in that regard, I definitely agree that we should engage to some degree, but we also have to be a bit cautious, especially considering, at the very least, when it comes to people like Alex Jones, considering that he has been recently having a lot of legal issues from his Sandy Hook comments and in court and with his own family, his issues with Twitter and all the other social medias that have essentially taken him out, being able to use them as a platform for his own voice. But yeah, engaging with someone like Alex Jones would caused some form of stir, at least with certain social media outlets that have already tried shunning him from being able to use their platforms. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well if we want to continue using these social media platforms to engage with people and not get caught up in whatever legal problems that him and his associates are currently dealing with.
Should be degrees of insane that we're willing to talk to.
Yeah.
He's back.
Yes, I am back from another device. I have lost the internet connection to my main computer, unfortunately. I don't know if this will still permit this particular session to continue for many more minutes. We shall see. If we are suddenly cut off, it's because the host channel, which is my main YouTube channel, would have been disconnected from this. But let's see how long this goes. Thank you for continuing the discussion while I was dealing with these technical difficulties. Essentially, the point I wanted to make was some of these conspiracy theorists, they might take whatever we say out of context, and they might decide that this is further evidence that we're part of this New World Order conspiracy. And some of them may even be unhinged enough